Okay. Good evening, everyone. I thank CMAI and CNA department for this opportunity. Thank Rebecca ma'am for introducing. Today we are going to see the rest of the stroke-related management. Yesterday, ma'am had covered the clinical manifestations, diagnosis. We finished with that. Today, I'm going to start with the management part of it. The early focus of care, as soon as a patient comes to the hospital, these are the three things that we concentrate on. One is the physiological stabilization. As we saw yesterday, most of the patients, it is because of hypertension or diabetes, the other morbid risk factors that they have. So we have to stabilize, physiologically stabilize them. The second one is selection and evaluation of patients apt for thrombolytics. And the third one is supportive care. I'm going to talk on these 8 headings. These are the things that I'm going to concentrate on this session. The first is how do we manage ABCs? The second one is to treat reversible conditions. The third one is exclude stroke mimics or chameleons, what we learned yesterday. The fourth one is confirm vascular pathology. The fifth one being acute stroke unit care and what we do as part of reperfusion therapy. The seventh one is early antiplatelet therapy and surgical intervention. Sorry, the first one is ABC and supportive care, which I put together. This mainly concentrates on any disease as such. When a patient comes as an emergency, we concentrate on the ABCs where airway, breathing, and circulation. All these three are taken care of. The first one being adequate airway and oxygen. If the patient has decreased level of consciousness, we have to make sure that their airway is patent and adequate oxygen support is given. If they have fever, okay, the TTM stands for targeted temperature management, where we control temperature. As we go through the session, you'll understand why both hypo and hypothermia are they have very bad prognostic features when it comes to stroke. The third one is ongoing assessment for arrhythmia and MI. In yesterday's session, you would have understood that cardiac related causes are the main reason why people end up with ischemic stroke. Okay, so we have to continue to assess arrhythmia and MI related factors. Fourth one is blood pressure management. We don't allow the patient, if even if their BP is really high, we don't reduce it drastically because we want the brain to be perfused adequately. Okay, so BP management, we will see how we are doing it. Glycemia control, again, both hypo and hyperglycemia has like they have proved to cause a worsened cerebral edema. So we have to make sure that both hypo and hyperglycemia are brought to a normoglycemic state. Fourth, the last one being prevention of complications and how we initiate secondary stroke prevention strategies to prevent recurrent stroke. The second topic under this is prompt reversal of condition that can worsen brain ischemia. These are the five factors or five aspects that can worsen brain ischemia. If you can see in the picture there, already there's a vessel occlusion causing hyperperfusion. And if we are going to allow brain edema, if we are going to allow these factors, it is going to be like a cycle continuing, worsening the infarction, worsening the edema, and ultimately leading to very bad global disability. So these factors are hypoperfusion, hypoglycemia, hyperemia, and fever if they have after a stroke. The third one, yesterday we saw the stroke mimics and chameleons. Just to remember what can mimic a stroke or a stroke-like symptom, we have this mnemonic, which stands for MEDICS. M, where migraine, multiple sclerosis, and any intracranial tumor can also mimic a stroke. Okay, E stands for seizure or epilepsy, and any electrolyte imbalance. Electrolyte imbalance, mainly hypo and hypoglycemia, or hyponatremia, or conditions where patients can have symptoms similar to stroke. D stands for dissection, aortic dissections, or any disc-related problems. I stands for intoxication, either with drug or alcohol, or any infectious disorders of the brain like encephalitis or meningitis, which can mimic a stroke. C stands for contusion, either in head injury, trauma related, or in psychiatric disorders where they have this conversion disorder. And yes stands for any secondaries or a subdural hematoma. So these are the mnemonic where we can understand what can mimic a stroke. Um, to just understand between stroke mimic and stroke chameleon, mimic is something which looks like a stroke but is something else. In a chameleon, it looks like something else, but it is really a stroke. Okay, so these are two things we have to understand. The fourth step when a patient comes to the hospital is to confirm vascular pathology. Again, in diagnostic factors we saw yesterday, CT scan is the first modal of treatment of diagnostic facility that we have. One thing is it is fast, it is easily available, and it can differentiate hemorrhage better. CT scan almost takes 5 minutes or less so that it is easy to identify the vascular pathology. MRI scan can pick up early ischemia within 15 minutes, and a posterior circulation pickup is better in an MRI scan. Okay, so now just a pictorial representation of three things that we have to understand when it comes to management. The first one is how much of the brain is already infarcted. Okay, how much of the parenchyma, the brain parenchyma that is involved. If you see in this picture, there's an animated feature where you can see a clot, and then there's a core area which is affected. That is the amount of brain that is infarcted, the parenchyma that is involved. The second thing we have to answer is which vessel is occluded. Okay, so it is like for easy understanding, I put pipe. And the third one is there any more tissue at risk, which is penumbra. So these three things, if we can answer, okay, pipe, parenchyma, and penumbra. Pipe is which vessel is involved, parenchyma, how much of the brain is damaged already, and is there any more tissue at risk, which is the penumbra. All right, so now that we know what is the problem or which vessel is affected, what is the management that is available? Okay. When it comes to medical management, we have thrombolytics, anticoagulants, and antiplatelets. Okay. This is a main line of management that we have in hospital. I will also take you through a stroke protocol which is followed here in our hospital where I will explain it to you in detail. But as far as the management is concerned, these are the three drugs. When it comes to thrombolytics, which is the main drug that we give, it's the reperfusion drug therapy, where we use the drug RTPA. RTPA stands for recombinant tissue plasminogen activator. The main use of this is it restores cerebral blood flow, it reduces ischemia, and it limits neurological disability. We saw yesterday, as soon as the patient is diagnosed, okay, within 3 to 4.5 hours, that is a window period that is allowed. Within this time, this IV RTPA has to be administered. I have given you the dose, which is 0.9 mg per kg body weight. It is calculated according to the patient's body weight. The maximum dose that we can go up to is 90 mg. Of the initial 10%, after we have diluted it in a 50 ml syringe, the first 10% is given as an IV bolus over a minute, and the remaining 90%, it is infused over the next 60 minutes. Imagine if we have loaded in a 50 cc syringe, the first 10% is given as an IV bolus by the physician, and then we connect it as an infusion. So if you take a person who is weighing 60 kg, then you multiply it into 9, it comes to 54. Okay, so we take 54 mg of TPA and we administer it for the patient. So IV intravenous RTPA is the main line of treatment, and it has to be given for a patient who comes to the hospital after the stroke symptom has occurred in them, and it has to be given within 3 to 4.5 hours. This is how the RTPA vial looks like. We get it in a box. It has the powdered form of the injection, and we have the sterile water, which is the diluent. This connector also comes along with the kit, the box, the medication box that we have. This sterile water and the medication has to be diluted. You don't have to shake it vigorously like how we when an MI patient comes, how we dilute streptokinase. Do not shake it too much so that a lot of air bubbles are formed. Just have to mix it in a manner that not much air bubbles are formed, and then it is once it is diluted, then we load it in a 50 cc syringe. Few things about this RTPA. We get it as a 50 mg, 50 mg, 20 mg are the available forms of this injection. 50 mg vial cost, the MRP is 43,467, and in CMC patients almost pay 42,000 for a 50 mg vial. So like I said, if a patient requires 54 mg, we have to use a 50 mg and a 10 mg or a 20 mg vial. And a 20 mg vial costs 20,800 MRP, and we get it for 19,000 in the hospital. So this is a very costly drug. We have to be really careful when we administer. We inform, though it's an emergency, we get an oral consent from the relatives before administering this TPA. This is then loaded in a 50 cc syringe, and then we connect an arterial line and we administer it as an infusion. There are quite a few inclusion and exclusion criterias I have mentioned here. If you can remember the three inclusion criterias, main thing is they have to be in the hospital within 3 to 4.5 hours. On a CT scan, it should definitely show an ischemic stroke. Okay, these are the two main things, and age is another factor which is included as a part of inclusion criteria. A lot of things come under exclusion criteria. We have absolute contraindications and relative contraindications. When I show you the guidelines, which is given by AHA, again, I will explain to you in detail. Okay, the major complication of RTPA is two major complications which are mentioned in the guidelines as well. One is angioedema. We have seen come across quite a few patients who have developed angioedema after administration of RTPA. Though it does not lead to a stage where we have to intubate, or still they require intensive monitoring in the ICU. The other thing is the drug being a fibrinolytic and a thrombolytic agent, spontaneous intracerebral hemorrhages can happen. Spontaneous bleed within the brain can happen. These are the two main things. If it is suspected, then we have to stop administering the injection. Once TPA is given, no anticoagulants or aspirin should be given in the first 24 hours after the RTPA is administered. Treat the BP only if the systolic BP is above 180 systolic, and diastolic if it is above 120 millimeter of mercury. During the administration time, watch for decreased level of consciousness, headache, vomiting, or any other neurological deficit. Before again administering this injection, few things that as nurses we have to be careful. Do not, if you want to do any invasive procedures like NG insertion or catheterization, or you want to take a sample, any IV drug administration, starting an IV line, everything has to be done before administering this injection, because once TPA is given, for the next 24 hours, we cannot do anything invasive because of the risk of bleeding. So anything we want to do invasive, simple things even like NG insertion or catheterization has to be done prior to TPA administration. I was talking to you about IV RTPA. Intra-arterial thrombolytics is also available. It's an option that is there. The dose in IV RTPA, it was 0.9 mg per kg body weight. Here it is 0.3 mg per kg body weight. But here patients will have to undergo a radiological procedure like a cerebral angio or a DSA for administering IV arterial thrombolysis. This is a scan of a scan image of a patient who had an IV intra-arterial thrombolysis. Okay, the first image you can see there is no perfusion beyond the clot, and while they were administering the intra-arterial thrombolysis, you can see how the reperfusion has started. The second medical management that I was talking about was anticoagulants. According to the new guidelines, it is not recommended due to poor evidence. As an emergency management, like as soon as the patient comes, heparin is not advised, because once you give heparin, you cannot thrombolyze them again for the next 24 hours. So IV heparin administration can be kept after the RTPA is administered. It is associated with increased tendency of hemorrhagic conversion of the ischemic stroke. Okay, what we are treating is an ischemic stroke, but if we administer heparin, there are a lot of evidences where it can get converted to an hemorrhagic stroke. But when it comes to antiplatelets, patients should receive aspirin within the 48 hours of an acute stroke. That is again after RTPA administration, but aspirin is not an alternative to thrombolytic therapy. They advise dual antiplatelet therapy with aspirin and clopidogrel for 21 days after a minor stroke or TIA. Yesterday we learned about TIA or minor strokes. For these patients, they are advised dual antiplatelet therapy for 21 days. For a lacunar stroke or a small vessel, a single antiplatelet is fine with either aspirin or clopidogrel. But if it's a large artery stroke, they always advise dual antiplatelet therapy. Now we have finished with the medical management. When we come to surgical or endovascular interventions, quite a few options are available. In endovascular options, we have mechanical thrombectomy. I already talked about intraarterial thrombolysis. So when it comes to surgeries, two surgical options. One is craniectomy and subacute interventions where there can be grafting or anastomosis, which can be done. So in mechanical thrombectomy, it is the established standard of care for patients with occlusion in the first branch of middle cerebral artery. MCA strokes, they always go for mechanical thrombectomy. Also, acute basilar artery occlusions can also be considered. There are quite a few devices that are being used, but the current one that we use, I will show it to you. This is one device called MERCI. MERCI stands for Mechanical Embolus Retrieval in Cerebral Ischemia. Okay, this was a device where they used devices to remove the clot. The second one is an aspiration thrombectomy called Penumbra. This is also not used anymore. This is what is currently being practiced. The device name is Solitaire. It is a stent retrieval device. Patients here, they have to undergo a similar procedure like angiography, where through the groin, from the groin, the femoral approach, the device is inserted and then they retrieve the clot. This is a procedure which is done in the radiology department under DSA cover. This procedure cost almost a lakh. The entire procedure with a stent, this comes to about a lakh in the hospital. This slide tells you the different options that were available till this time period. It started with intraarterial thrombolysis, then they had ultrasound related clot clot destruction strategies. Then they had coiled retrievers. What I showed, MERCI, was part of coiled retrievers. Then came Penumbra, which was aspiration. Right now, what we have is the last one, which is the stent retrievers. And the device that we have is Solitaire. Okay, this is a recent, and this is the current AHA guideline supports this stent retrievers. And MERCI or Penumbra or ultrasound is not used anymore. Okay, this is the ultrasound. I just wanted to put it here, but we don't use it. This is a sonothrombolysis that was practiced, but not in existence anymore. Coming to summarizing these things, okay, there is an infarct. We have a core area, the brain area, which is damaged, and we have the penumbra. Okay, our main aim is to remove this clot so that we can save the penumbra. Treatment options available are IV RTPA, which I had covered already. Sonothrombolysis is not used anymore. Intraarterial thrombolysis is another option. And then we have mechanical devices in which Solitaire is being used currently. Coming to surgical option is mainly restricted for the complication of stroke when patients end up with severe cerebral edema. It is indicated in large vessel ischemic stroke, which involves MCA territory, where patients can end up with severe edema and herniation. To prevent herniation, it's a rescue therapy where we allow edema to happen without herniation. The craniectomy area has to be large enough to allow swelling with minimal infarction. Okay. If this is a CT scan showing a patient with edema, in the first 16 hours, if we can treat with osmotic diuretics or hypertonic saline um, to try and reduce the edema, then keep the surgeons informed and do not administer any of the anticoagulants or antiplatelets because because if the patient is getting posted for surgery, we don't want them to have any risk of bleeding. This is a picture where the edema has become worsened and then they have taken the patient for craniectomy. Edema worsens, like edema happens after a stroke when due to the decreased blood supply, patients can have edema, and that is because of the chemical mediators that have come into play, which causes this edema. Along with that, if we are not taking care of the patient's glucose, both hypo and hyperglycemia can worsen edema, and any electrolyte imbalance can also worsen this edema. So this is a complication of stroke. If we are not able to treat with any of those medications or both thrombolysis and thrombectomy has not helped, then this is the final option that we have where we remove a part of the skull. Craniectomy, we remove a part of the skull so that we allow the brain to swell and it does not herniate into the foramen magnum. These are just pictures to show you. Once the cranium is removed, this is a fronto-temporoparietal decompressive craniectomy. They have removed the part of the skull and then they just cover it with a flap. And then when the patient has edema, it continues to swell and gradually as in few days time, the edema comes down and the patient can undergo cranioplasty later in few months time period. So that covers the surgical options. Subacute interventions is done for patients who have extracranial or intracranial atherosclerotic disease, especially if the atherosclerotic plaque is in the vertebral artery or in the carotid. They do a procedure called external carotid, internal carotid bypass grafting with superior temporal artery and middle cerebral artery. Okay, I can show you a picture. This is the STA-MCA anastomosis. Okay, STA stands for superior temporal artery and MCA stands for middle cerebral artery, where this grafting can be done in order to bypass that atherosclerotic plaque. Endovascular therapies, they encompass interventional radiological procedures. Intravascular stenting like angioplasty can be done to maintain vessel patency. Coming to the last surgical option that we have is carotid endarterectomy. This is indicated for internal carotid artery stenosis. It consists of careful removal of the atherosclerotic plaque from the artery after a temporary bypass has been performed for adequate cerebral perfusion. Okay. This is the CEA, carotid endarterectomy. If the patient has an atherosclerotic plaque in the carotid arteries, okay, then they have to do a bypass. A temporary bypass is done and carefully this plaque is removed so that the blood flow is restored. When they do a CEA, carotid endarterectomy, there are certain concerns in the postoperative period because in the carotid artery, we have the carotid sinus. If that has a malfunction, patients can have labile blood pressures, their BP can become unstable. They can have transient neurological deficits. They can have facial or vagal nerve injury. Hematomas or suture line rupture can form, which can be very deadly. They can have bleed. TIAs can happen or hyperperfusion syndromes can also be expected in the postoperative period. So that's about the management. So we started with medical management where we have thrombolytics, anticoagulants and antiplatelets. Then we saw about thrombectomy, mechanical thrombectomy, where we have devices. If you can just remember about Solitaire, which is a stent retrieval device, option is available. If thrombolysis and thrombectomy does not work, and the patient continues to have edema, then the surgical option of deep decompressive craniectomy is done. Apart from this, the other subacute interventions are carotid endarterectomy and the bypass grafting that we have. Coming to the protocol that we have, okay, if you can see this, this is the door to needle time that we have. The door to needle time is the window period that is given for patients, which has to be within the 3 to 4.5 hour time period. Door is where the triage happens. Okay, when the patient has the symptom has been identified at home, or somebody does a fast and recognizes the symptom, and patient comes to the hospital. In the triage or the emergency department where they triage, they again look for symptoms. Okay, in the triage, what we do is a brief history and the complaints are obtained. The main thing that we have to ask is, when was the patient last normal? Okay, or when was he without symptoms? So that is the time of onset of symptoms. And in the triage, again, vital signs are very important. Blood pressure, heart rate. If we can get an ECG, well and good, but otherwise we don't have to delay. For that, temperature, respiratory rate, and GRBS is very important. And then patients are prioritized. If the triage staff identifies that patient has a stroke, okay, then they are prioritized and sent to the emergency physician. The second thing is a general assessment, which is done by the emergency department staff who's there. They start the patient on oxygen. Okay, oxygen is only indicated if the patient's saturation is less than 94. If they are saturating more than 94, then we don't have to give supplemental oxygen. Start IV line. Okay, generally for all patients, IV line is started in the casualty. Just give normal saline. Do not give dextrose related solutions, because dextrose can cause or worsen the edema. Perform 12 lead ECG if it is available, but at least a cardiac monitor can be connected. Determine patient's weight, because if we want to thrombolize, we have to know the patient's weight. But if patients have weakness, or at least an approximate ideal body weight can be calculated. If indicated, I already told you before, thrombolysis or catheterization or NG insertion has to be done, which can be done in the emergency department itself. Keep the head end elevated at 30 degree. Draw blood for investigation. The common investigations that we will want is the bleeding parameters like INR, PT, APTT. Serum electrolytes are important because electrolyte imbalances can mimic a stroke. Blood glucose is very important, and the other parameters like renal function test and liver function test. Then comes the stroke code activation. Once the emergency staff is identified, and we have a stroke team in our hospital, once the stroke code is activated, the stroke physician comes, they perform the assessment, and then the stroke nurse also is part of the stroke team. Okay, and stroke nurse performs this assessment. She takes a detailed history of the complaints, and she performs the NIHSS scoring and the MRS scoring. NIHSS we learned yesterday because we want to know the severity of the stroke. Based on the severity, the thrombolysis therapy is determined. Only if the score is less than 21, patients can be thrombolized. So for that reason, we have to have NIHSS score. NIHSS is available as an app. In the phone, it can be downloaded, and patient scoring can be done easily on the app. And MRS is modified ranking scale. That score tells the outcome of a person, okay, how the person outcome will be after the stroke. So these two are done, and then she also makes sure that hospital attendants are available for transferring to the radiology. Once the initial assessment is done, or once it is resembling a stroke, then the patient definitely has to be taken for a CT evaluation, because we want to rule out whether it's an ischemic stroke or an hemorrhagic stroke. Only then the further treatment can be initiated. So transferring the patient to radiology room, uh, we have the stroke kit in our hospital, where in the kit we have this TPA and all the essential things like an IV set, 50 cc syringe, and inside all those things are kept inside the stroke kit. Uh, while the patient is undergoing a CT, and if they are able to differentiate between a hemorrhagic and an ischemic stroke, the thrombolysis is done even in the radiology department itself. The medicine is administered with the physician order, where the initial bolus will be given by the stroke physician, and then it is followed as an infusion. So stroke, that is the responsibilities of a stroke nurse in assessment and intervention. Then we confirm it by imaging. Okay, thrombolization, if it is an ischemic stroke, definitely patients have to receive RTPA as per the stroke physician's order. Okay, treatment and stabilization. After the TPA has been initiated, patient can be shifted to the corresponding ICU, the neuro ICU, where the patients will be continued to monitor. Then comes discharge checklist, follow-up and rehabilitation. So this is the protocol which is followed in our hospital or anywhere there is a stroke unit. These are the steps that are followed. The initial triaging, general assessment, the stroke code activation, assessment by the physician and the stroke nurse. Then imaging is definitely done. And once imaging is done, if it's a ischemic stroke, then thrombolization is recommended. And then the further treatment and stabilization happens in the neuro ICU. Okay, so this part of the initial steps from the door, the triage till the stroke nurse assessment happens in the casualty or the emergency department. And the rest of it from thrombolization till rehabilitation, it follows in the radiology and the neurology department. Though we have this protocol for stroke, it again depends on when the patient had the symptoms, or sometimes the patient could have had symptoms during their sleep. So we are not sure when the patient was last seen normal. So all this depends on when the symptom, like when did the patient have the symptom. Okay, so that determines what kind of treatment can be given for patients. Okay, when we have received the patient to the neuro ICU, patient problems that can be encountered are ineffective airway clearance, where if the patient has a low level of consciousness or a low GCS, a patient cannot maintain an adequate airway and they can have ineffective airway clearance. Aspiration risk is very high. If the patient has dysphagia or problems with swallowing, then they can have a lot of aspiration. They can have altered cerebral tissue perfusion, which is the main problem that patients come to us with. Sensory perceptual alterations, which I will talk to you in the next few slides. Patients will have impaired swallowing and nutrition, impaired communication in the form of aphasias, impaired physical mobility if they have hemiplegias and hemiparesis or ataxias. Those patients can have impaired physical mobility and risk for infection if they are going to be on invasive lines. That can itself cause infection, or if the patient has aspirated, aspiration pneumonia can develop in patients. The effects of stroke, when we see it system-wise, if you can see, musculoskeletal and motor deficits, these are the problems that are encountered by patients. They can have stroke, we already know they have one-sided paralysis or weakness, which is hemiplegia and hemiparesis. They can have ataxias and imbalance. Long-term, if the patient has not been mobilized adequately, they can end up with contractures. They can have spasticity. Shoulder subluxation is one major uh, complication or effect that patients can encounter, shoulder subluxation, and falls, because they already have ataxias and hemiplegia weaknesses. So patients can have falls. Coming to sensory deficits or sensory perceptual alterations that they can have, in visual thing, they can have homonymous hemianopsia, where one half of the visual field is lost, or they can have hemispatial neglect, where they neglect one half of the body. They think that one half is not present at all, and they can have diplopia or double vision. They can lose sensation on the affected side, where they will not be able to perceive touch, pain, temperature, those sensation, or they can have apraxias and agnosias. Apraxia is they lose ability to use objects. Like if we give them a comb, they will not know it is for combing their hair. Or if you give them a pen, they will not know that it is used for writing. So those are apraxias that patients can have. Agnosia is loss of, they lose the ability to identify through senses. Agnosias can be of different types, color agnosias, where they cannot differentiate colors. Or if you give them an object, they cannot sense it with their hands and identify what object it is. So those are agnosias that patients can have. They can have cognitive decline, not be able to, they will not have judgment ability, or attention span will be reduced. They can have impaired attention and distractibility, memory difficulties, and executive functioning. The language and communication deficits that patients will encounter are aphasias. Aphasias, like yesterday ma'am talked about Broca's aphasia, Wernicke's aphasia, and global aphasias. Patients will have communication disorder defects or deficits, which has to be addressed. They can have apraxia of speech. It is like they know what they want to say, but they are unable to form sounds or meaningful words. So that is apraxia. And they can have dysarthria, which is motor speech disorder. Under genitourinary complications, patients can have urinary incontinence, fecal incontinence. Under GI complication, they can have dysphagia, which is a major deficit that patients can come across. The last one being psychosocial issues. Patients can have post-stroke depression. Uh, like most patients, they would have been normal till a while ago. They were normally walking, speaking, everything. Suddenly, you lose the ability to walk and you can't speak. You know what you want to say, but you can't speak. All this can lead to depressive episodes in patients. They can be emotionally labile, and sexuality can be affected. Coming to the complications of stroke, post-stroke, we already saw two complications as part of thrombolysis, where they can have angioedema and intracerebral hemorrhage. But these are general complications after a stroke. Okay, the medical complications that patients can have under cardiovascular, it is mainly DVT and pulmonary embolism, which together can cause venous thromboembolism, VTE, and atrial fibrillations. Under pulmonary complications, we have aspiration pneumonia, because if patients have dysphagia and they have risk of aspiration, they can end up with aspiration pneumonia or nosocomial pneumonia. Under sleep disorders, patients can have sleep disordered breathing and sleep-wake disorders. Coming to the neurological complications after a stroke, patients can have post-stroke seizure disorder, or there's something called central pain syndrome or central post-stroke pain syndrome, and hemiplegic shoulder pain. Whichever side they have hemiplegia, that side patients can have severe shoulder pain. Integumentary complication, because they are going to be bedridden, patients can end up with pressure sores if they are not adequately turned. Rehabilitation, Rebecca ma'am is going to cover in depth, so I'm going to just tell you the basics of rehabilitation, where musculoskeletal, as part of mobility training, patients have to undergo rehabilitation. For language and communication deficits, sometimes patients have to go for speech therapy. We have speech language pathologists who identified what kind of aphasias they have, and then their language deficits will be addressed to. Cognitive rehabilitation, like to train them adequately for them to have their memory back. Cognitive rehabilitation is done, and education for both the family and the patient, it is advised. I have put a few education guidelines that can be used for stroke survivors. Okay, if we are sending a patient home, what all teaching can be given for patients? Under disease condition, we normally tell them what kind of stroke they have, what caused, or what was the risk factor for them to have a stroke. how was it managed in the hospital, and what is the further management? Again, we have to concentrate on secondary prevention, which ma'am will do it in the following session. Care required at home. Okay, we can talk to them about cognitive training, like you can tell them to keep the patient oriented always, like they can watch uh, photo albums or watch some programs on the TV. Okay, cognitive stimulation, their friends can come and talk. Then nutrition, we have to advise if the patient is going to have dysphagia, it's a separate dysphagia training or swallowing training is done for patients. So nutrition has to be addressed. Respiratory, if they're going to have aspiration risk, respiratory care has to be taught to them. Skin care, positioning the patient uh, if they are immobilized, even sitting on a chair or lying on a bed, where are the pressure points, those have to be identified. And skincare, positioning, bladder bowel training, and safety for fall prevention, those are the teachings that we can give. Under medications, patients will go home with antiplatelets and anticoagulants. So those have to be taught to them. They can be put on antidepressants because of the post-stroke depression that they have. Sleeping medications will be given. If they are comorbid patients along with stroke, they can be on antihypertensive, antidiabetic. So these are all the teachings that can be given. Exercise and mobility related, these are the training that patients can undergo. Communication, they definitely have to undergo speech therapy. Swallowing, again, training is done for dysphagia, and visual perceptual deficits can also be addressed. These are other, for the caregiver, we can tell them about certain equipments like orthotic devices that can be given for patients, mobility training, how they can assist them in the activities of daily living, any modifications that are required at home, transportation, for wheelchair accessibility, all those things can be taught for patients. Slowly, when they have kind of recovered, then comes the occasional rehabilitation. If the patients can go back to work, that can also be addressed in the rehabilitation. Support and wellness, we can talk to them about intimacy and sexuality, peer support, and the stroke clubs or associations that are available. Okay, coming to the last thing, the stroke pathway. Our main aim is primary prevention, which has to be done when we know the risk factors like hypertension, diabetes, or cardiac-related disorders, or dyslipidemia, uh, smokers, alcoholics, sedentary lifestyle. All those have to be addressed in the primary prevention. But if patients have come with stroke, rapid detection is required. Thrombolysis is the mainstay of treatment that we have. Then the patients are shifted to the stroke unit care. And then rehabilitation and all those things follow in the coming days. So this covers the medical management, the surgical management, and the teaching that we can give for patient. The rest of the rehabilitation will be covered by ma'am. Before I could end, I would like to show you the AHA guidelines. Most of what we have talked now, okay, why do we say that only 3 hours is advised? Or why do we say stent retrievals are advised? All these are given by the AHA guidelines. I would like to show you this PowerPoint. Uh, we will definitely share it to you. If you have any doubts with regard to stroke management, this guidelines will give you everything. I know it's a quite extensive slide that is here, but then please use it for any reference that you need. This is mainly given by AHA and ASA. AHA is American Heart Association and ASA is American Stroke Association. They have given guidelines for our healthcare workers. When I go through the slides, these are two terminologies that you have to understand, or when you're using the slide for reference, please know these two terms. One is called the class of recommendations, COR. The second one is called the level of evidence. These are two things. It will be written in the slides as COR and LOE. COR is class of recommendation and LOE is level of evidence. When a patient has this class one, when any management strategy has this class one recommendation, then you know it is of a very strong evidence, or it has very good benefit for the patient. When you see a red color or a class 3 evidence, then you know the risk is more than the benefit. So as I go through the slides, please watch for these. You will come across class 1 evidence and class 2 or class 3 evidence. And the level of evidence, if you see, we have level A, which is the highest evidence, which has come from lot of research. Level B is randomized from randomized studies. Level B, NR is non-randomized. And the other two things are limited data and expert opinion. These are the 6 major headings under which the AHA guidelines is formulated. They talk about pre-hospital stroke management, emergency evaluation, what happens in the emergency department, what happens in hospital, how do we treat complications, and secondary prevention. I'm not going to go into details of everything, but I just wanted to show you how these guidelines are formulated. In the pre-hospital, I'm just going to come to point 1.5, where AHA advises that all hospitals, if they are treating stroke patients, they should have a stroke team. And the stroke team, if you see, it should have a designated stroke physician, stroke nurse, a lab, and a radiology personnel. Okay, so if you see, that is the class of recommendation. If you see, it is class 1 evidence that we have for this. The second one is under emergency evaluation. We have 3 things. One is stroke scale. Second one is what imaging has to be done and what diagnostic tests. Okay, stroke scale, I think all of you are familiar. NIHS is the standard scale that has to be used. Brain imaging, definitely it is a non-contrast CT scanning. And diagnostic test, if you see, we are mainly, the only diagnostic test that is done prior to thrombolysis is glucose checking. Okay, that is. So stroke scale, if you see, NIHS is a preferable. It has class 1 evidence. Brain imaging, it is only non-contrast CT. Do not delay RTPA treatment thinking you can do a advanced imaging. Okay, vascular and perfusion imaging should not delay altiplase treatment. Any imaging, if you want to do an advanced imaging, it has to be after 6 hours from lost normal. Okay, before that 6 hours, we have to only concentrate on thrombolysis. Under other diagnostic tests, the first thing, if you can read, it is only glucose assessment they ask us to do. Okay, it must precede the initiation of IV altiplase. That's the only thing. This is a third set of protocols that they have given under emergency supportive care and treatment. If you see whatever I have covered in the previous topic, all those are given with evidence. Under airway and breathing, they have advised only start oxygen if the patient saturation is less than 94. Otherwise, we don't need it. Blood pressure, again, treat blood pressure only if the systolic is above 185 and the diastolic is less than is above 110. Otherwise, till 185 by 110, we don't have to treat or give them any antihypertensives. If the BP is high, the antihypertensives that are advised are labetalol and nicardipine. Okay, so you can go through the dosages or temperature. I have already talked to you. Both hypo and hypothermia are bad, so that has to be addressed. Glucose, again, we already saw glucose. GRBS is the only thing that we have to check before TPA administration. So both hypo and hypoglycemia have to be treated because both have shown to have very bad prognosis in patients. Coming to RTPA, I have dealt in detail, but this is a recommendation that is given by ASA, American Stroke Association. It has to be started within 3 hours. Now they have extended up to 4.5 hours. So if the patient comes to the hospital within 3 to 4.5 hours, then TPA can be administered. The dosage, what I talked to you, is also the recommendation that is given by them. TPA can be given in patients with sickle cell disease. They do not require, if you see this red, the class of recommendation, if you see other antithrombotics are not advised, heparin is definitely not advised in the first 24 hours. Okay, it shows the class of recommendation. It is class 3, which is harmful for patients. Regarding RTPA, quite a few information is there. I'm not going to go into details of everything. Please check glucose because hypoglycemia and hyperglycemia can mimic like a stroke. So without treating that, we shouldn't think that patients are having stroke and give TPA. First, make sure that they don't have hypo or hypoglycemia. Only then go ahead with RTPA administration. These are quite a few information about it. I will give it to you so that you can go through. The dosage is here. They have given listed all the indications, the contraindications. In contraindications, I just want to say a few things. One is if the patient, if it's a woman who is menstruating, unless they have menorrhagia, uh, TPA can be administered. Pregnancy again is not a contraindication. It can be considered if the benefit is more than the risk. Especially, but in the postpartum period, they usually don't advise TPA administration. In recently, we have had one mother, pregnant mother, whom we have successfully given TPA, whom it was very beneficial. The complication that I talked to you about earlier, the two major complications after RTPA is angioedema and intracerebral hemorrhage. For angioedema, can just go with steroids and avil, diphenhydramine, or injection adrenaline or epinephrine can be administered. These are the complications, angioedema complications that patients can have um, after a TPA administration. For intracerebral hemorrhage, if it is identified, please stop RTPA administration, and tranexamic acid can be it is recommended for patients if they have intracerebral hemorrhage. Other thrombolytics, I talked to you about intraarterial and sonothrombolysis. If you see, tenecteplase was another drug. Apart from RTPA, tenecteplase was another drug, but it is not superior to alteplase. And then we have sonothrombolysis, which is again not recommended for patients. That is why sonothrombolysis have been taken off. Mechanical thrombectomy, I just want to show you the recommendation. Stent retrievers is the only thing that is recommended by the AHA guidelines. If you see this highlighted one, use of stent retrievers is indicated in preference to the Mercy device. Regarding intraarterial thrombolysis, I talked to you. This is about aspirin. It has to be started 24 to 48 hours after TPA administration, not in the emergency time period. And in a minor stroke, which I told you earlier, minor stroke or TIA, this aspirin and clopidogrel, a dual antiplatelet therapy, has to be given for 21 days. Anticoagulants, if you see, it is not at all recommended in the emergent period. Okay, so don't have to think about heparin administration in the initial period. Volume expanders are not given for patients. Neuroprotective agents are also not recommended for patients in the initial period. This one, CEA, carotid endarterectomy, is again advised for patients who have a carotid stenosis. All right. So in hospital treatment, all this we have already covered. For which patients we can start oxygen, how is blood pressure managed, how is temperature managed, and glucose. I will just go to dysphagia screening. Dysphagia screening is definitely recommended by AHA. It has to be done while the patient is in the hospital. The second one is nutrition has to be started for patients either enteral or oral after the screening has been done. Regarding DVT prophylaxis, the recommended guidelines is it's only pneumatic compression. TET stocking should not be applied for patients, and even heparin administration for prophylactic therapy is not recommended. If you see the last class of recommendation, it is compression stockings are strictly not advised for patients. Depression screening, and these are the prophylactic antibiotics, or definitely catheterizing a patient is not advised by the AHA. The main thing is care when a patient is bedridden, preventing pressure sores, skin pressure areas have to be covered, prevent skin breakdown, good nutrition. We have to teach patients how to ambulate or how to mobilize a patient from bed to wheelchair. Those kind of teachings can be given. The last thing I want to tell is treatment of the acute complication. We talked about decompressive craniectomy. This ventriculostomy and decompressive craniectomy are the level 1 evidence that is given for cerebral edema. So that is the final option that we have for patients with stroke when they have cerebral edema. If patients have seizures post-stroke, then they have to be treated like a regular any seizure patient with anti-seizure medications. But prophylactically, we don't have to start any patient on anti-seizure drugs when they have a stroke. Prophylactic anti-seizure drugs are not recommended in patients. So these are the guidelines. This is an AHA guidelines that is there. All that is followed in our hospital and all that I talked in the management is part of this AHA guidelines. Please feel free to use it, and if you have any doubts, you can ask. I'm going to stop my presentation with this. Kindly repeat third and fourth point. Stroke code activation. Okay. Okay. This third and fourth point is from where? Third and fourth. Stroke code activation. All right. Maybe after Rebecca ma'am finishes the session, can we? I will take the questions. Now I'll hand over the session to Rebecca ma'am. அது எந்த பாயிண்ட்னே தெரியல மேம்.
Shashi Sharma, can you please type which slide or which aspect you would like to discuss? Because you mentioned kindly repeat third and fourth point. We would like to know regarding the treatment protocol or which one. Can you please type in clearly?
Good evening once again. I'm back with another topic, which I have called it as stroke recovery and levels of prevention. All I'm going to say in this particular slide is about rehabilitation after stroke. Now, I would also at this time apologize that I am not a rehab nurse because we both work in the acute setup, that is in hospital when a patient is coming with stroke, and then what do we do? Of course, the patient stays in the hospital for about 2 to 3 weeks, which is also like an acute or a subacute phase of rehabilitation. But afterwards, patient is shifted to a stroke rehabilitation, either within the hospital or outside the hospital, a perfect rehab center, and that is where most of the works that I'm talking here will happen. Because we have seen that I'm able to say a little bit of it, more of it, it will be better for a rehab person to speak. So going on to the neuro rehabilitation. We have all through, when we start students, we know that brain cells do not regenerate when they are destroyed. This has been, we've been hearing this. Unlike many other cells, you have a cut in the body, anywhere in the body, it heals and it becomes normal. But brain cells do not regenerate. This is true. Okay, to an extent, it is true. But it does not mean that no recovery can occur. Why? Because there's something called as neuroplasticity. Okay, the brain is very flexible and is able to reorganize itself to an extent in order to regain any lost function. If you look at the picture there on top, it says, there is a neuron and the synapses should happen. But when there is no synapse, when there is a disconnection between one neuron and another neuron, you can have collaterals coming in. So that is called as collateral sprouting. Now, what sprouts? It can be an axon, and more, it can be a dendrite. So collateral sprouting makes up for the lost contacts. This is the basic thing that we have to understand when we talk about neurorehabilitation. That is when, that is how we will understand how these patients who have lost the ability to speak, lost the ability to walk, lost the ability to balance, how do they regain? That is the basic thing that we have to understand. So brain injury affects neuronal circuit by causing the death of neurons and glial cells, destroying connections between them. Any kind of brain injury, TBI or stroke or any disease condition that is going to affect the dendrites and the axons is destroyed. But what happens is, the more you practice the neuronal circuit in the brain, the stronger that circuit becomes. That is why it's beautifully given by Donald Hebb. It's called Hebb's law. He says the neurons that fire together, they wire together, because whatever is lost, the brain is able to develop some collaterals and then it is able to redo it. It may not be exactly like before. Before stroke, probably a person was a sports person or an athletic. Maybe after stroke, he may not regain the same perfect form like before, but he can gain, to an extent. And this is called as brain plasticity or neuroplasticity. With this basic concept, we go into the thing. So what is life after stroke? Many people say, we all know stroke. We've been hearing through from the beginning till last session. Stroke causes a lot of disability. It's true, but it affects everybody differently. And there is a life after stroke. It is not that there is an end. And recovery from stroke involves making changes in the physical, social, emotional aspects in life, which can take months to years. It may be 3 months, it may be 6 months, it may be 1 year. We also see people after 1 year, they are still exercising or rehabilitating to become normal. Okay? So it's very important that we understand what is rehabilitation. Rehabilitation is nothing but getting back to normal life and living as independent a life as possible. We can, at least the person must be able to take care of his own hygienic needs, take care of the eliminational needs, take care of eating, all that if he is able to do on his own, that is an independent life according to that particular person. It means learning new skills or relearning the old ones. I'm going to give you some examples which will tell you how we relearn the old skills. It also involves strategies to prevent complications. Deborah dealt with all the complications, so I may not repeat everything, but here and there, one or two which needs concentration, I will talk about it. This person is called as Walter Biscardi, and he is an athlete, as I told you. He is, you can see him walking, running. He is now a very strong person. But do you believe that he was once upon a time a stroke victim? Now he's become a motivational speaker for many years, and he's a stroke survivor. He lost his speech, cognition, and mobility, all three, during the stroke attack. But he regained it after a year, and he is now presently a role model for many stroke victims. And he says, be active as possible. and try to be on your own as much as possible. So this is his slogan, So with this, he motivates many people who are stroke victims. Now, stroke recovery process. Stroke recovery happens as soon as the disease process is under control. Now, what do my disease process? There's something called stroke in evolution, or we call it as complete stroke. Now, when we say complete stroke, this patient has had a complete stroke and he is not going to worsen. Or a person who's come in stroke evolution, he's under treatment and his treatment is on the process and he is not going to further worsen. That is when a stroke recovery should start. And the brain starts very slowly to respond to the damage done to it. But it can alter or change its way of functioning and accommodate for the loss of death or parts. As I said, the brain is very flexible and slowly it will take its own time to regain its function one by one. Normally people say, when we have patients, they are very less motivated in the beginning. They will not be able to walk, they will not be able to do anything at all. And they say, the recovery takes, you take 2 steps forward, sorry, 1 step forward, it becomes 2, it's wrongly I have typed it. Take 1 step forward and 2 steps backward. That is how it is. So they become very demotivated in the long run. But we have to, as nurses, motivate. And they need a lot of love and support and motivation for this. So the nurses who are working in the ward in our own setup, they spend a lot of time talking to them, telling them they have to do that. And only with that, our physiotherapists are very good and they really do that job very well. A routine or pattern will always help the stroke survivor. We should have a routine for these patients because they also have problem with their memory and cognition sometimes. So you can't go there and do the exercise at 9 o'clock one day and then 10 o'clock the other day or 2 o'clock the other day. If it's going to be 9 o'clock, you start the exercise at 9 o'clock. Every day it has to be at 9 o'clock. So the brain learns this is the time that I have to exercise. So it becomes active. So that a routine has to be there in stroke recovery. Who are there in the team, rehabilitation team? There are doctors, a nurse, occupational therapist, physiotherapist, social workers, chiropodist, home help. Home help is the relative or the bystander. I will tell you how important their role is, speech therapist and clinical psychologist. So these are the team members of rehabilitation. What is nurses' role in rehabilitation? First of all, we are there for technical expert, preventing complications. Like Deborah said, these patients have a lot of complications. Stroke is one thing, but all the complications that they develop after stroke is so much extensive that many people succumb to death because of the complications and not because the stroke itself. So we are there primarily as care providers and technical experts in any setting, whether it be in the hospital or a rehab setup, community or nursing home, wherever we are placed. Nurses are the key persons for rehabilitation. We work as coordinator and facilitator, educator, motivator, researcher, and administrator. These are the roles that we play as nurses. So rehab process starts immediately after stabilization. And as soon as the patient is shifted from intensive care unit to the ward for, as a step down process, the formal assessment will be conducted by a nurse initially, and then a physiotherapist, an occupational therapist, a speech language therapist, and a social worker. Now, all these people have their own forms or their way of assessing what is the patient's, what is the primary problem of the patient, okay, not the stroke, but related to the difficulties or disabilities, and how are we going to work towards this. ESD is early support discharge. Now, this is a strong recommendation by World Health, the World Stroke Organization. Of course, yes, for people with mild to moderate disability. A person who has come with a hemorrhagic stroke or severe disability, you really can't do that early support discharge. But of course, for patients with mild to moderate disability, we can quickly discharge the patient from home and encourage community-based rehabilitative care. There is evidence, Deborah was saying evidence 1C. So it is organized, community-based and coordinated interprofessional rehabilitation care is recommended in the outpatient or home-based settings. Why? Because now we're going to talk about that more when we talk about traumatic brain injury. When we normally in Indian scenario, at least what we have seen in our hospitals, people are not very willing to discharge the patients. You know, in this condition, a person who is not walking, a person who cannot take care of himself or herself, they are not willing to take them to home. They will say, no, no, as long as the patient becomes all right, patient has to be in the hospital. Now that mindset is there in us, but we recommend the community-based care. A person from the hospital after the acute and subacute phase must be transferred to the house, you know, and a community nurse and the family members should be able to take care of the patients. That is evidence. Now there's something called very early mobilization. This protocol is also associated, and in any time when the patient is with stroke, they have done a lot of studies and they've said there is a favorable outcome at 3 months when we do this early mobilization. So when do you mobilize a stroke patient? They say after 24 to 48 hours. From 24 hours to 48 hours, you can mobilize the patient after stroke. If the patient had RTPA, or if the patient did not have RTPA and the patient was just given an anticoagulant, whatever it is, we can start doing this. We have not done this in our hospital, but soon we may start doing this. In countries like in the Western countries like US, Australia, you know, they say they discharge the patient within 4 days. 4 days is the maximum that they keep a stroke patient in the hospital. And after that, the patient is shifted to nursing home. This you can see in many articles, many evidences you will be able to find that we are not able to do it now, but soon we will also start doing it in India with better. What are the factors that affect the stroke rehabilitation or outcome? The severity and degree of damage to the brain. Now, all what we are saying in the rehabilitation, now in the following slides, may not happen for some patients because the degree of damage that is occurred because of stroke may be massive. And so they may not be able to experience that kind of an outcome. Age. The degree of recovery is often greater in children and young adults as compared to the elderly. Level of alertness, that is the cognition. Now, a person who is not cognitive, person who is not aware of the surroundings has very little interaction with everyone. So whatever you tell him, whatever motivation you give, the response from the person himself is very less. So level of alertness actually affects the outcome during rehabilitation. The intensity of the rehabilitation program. What do we mean by the intensity? It is not just a 5 minutes exercise that we give for these patients. When a physiotherapist comes into the ward, he spends at least 1 hour with the patient, at least 1 hour. And it is more in the rehabilitative setup. The evidence or the guideline says you have to spend 2 to 3 hours whatever exercise you are giving, whether it is speech therapy, physiotherapy, occupational therapy. The intensity is, you know, the more if the intensity is increased, the outcome will be very good. Severity of concurrent medical problems. No, of course, the comorbidities that the patient has. Patient suddenly becomes hypertensive or increased sugar level. All that will also bring down the outcome. The home environment, cooperation of family and friends. If the caregiver is well motivated, and usually in our setup we see the women, the wife of the victim, if the husband is the victim, the women really take care of them very well, in helping, doing everything. That itself will give a lot of motivation to the stroke victim to become all right. The timing of the rehabilitation. This is, when do you start the rehabilitation? Do you start on day 1? Do you start on day 5? Okay, it depends on, of course, the condition of the patient. If the patient is on a lot of lines, patient is in intensive care unit, still has not come out of the acute phase, then you have to wait for some more time. And once the patient is fully stabilized, then we can start the rehabilitation. So these are the factors that affect the outcome. Now, what are the aspects of rehabilitation? The aspects are listed here. Sitting, how do you sit? How do you balance? How do you walk? Getting out of bed or chair, transfer from bed to chair, chair to bed, swallowing, the nutrition, speech, memory, dressing, bathing, and daily life. So if you can see, it is activities of daily living. We all know what are the activities of daily living. Okay, and these are the activities of daily living, and they will need help in all these things. If a patient, especially if it was a mild stroke, a minor stroke, they may not have there may not be a need for all these things. But definitely if a patient comes with an MCA stroke, he is going to be there with aphasia. If it is going to be a patient with ACA stroke, anterior cerebral artery, he is going to have problems with his leg. If it is going to be internal carotid artery, there are going to be different problems. So depending on what type of stroke is, they're going to have problems. So, but these are the aim. This is the aim for us. We focus on all these things. What are they? Teach the patient to eat, teach the patient to dress himself, just to button a shirt, or take a comb and comb the hair, drink a glass of water. These are small little things that he will need help. Communication, swallowing, improving memory and judgment, speech and language, balance, psychological adjustment, self-image, and overall mobility. If you try to improve all these things, definitely the person's quality of life will be excellent, and he will feel very independent after a stroke. So I will go through one by one. I will not take much time. The next 15 minutes, I'll be able to finish. The physical therapy, the first one is physiotherapy, and both passive and active exercises are needed. Now, in the hospital, in our wards itself, what we tell them is, if the person is a left hemiplegic, if the left hand is paralyzed, we give a ball in the left hand and ask the person to hold that hand with the right hand, which is unaffected, and lift the hand. So the patient himself will be able to do some exercises using the unaffected arm. So both passive and active exercises will help the patient. And enhanced outcomes of gait related activities, all that will be given by the physiotherapist. They do a lot of exercises. They make them walk, they make them get down, stand first, and there are many devices that they use. And all is focused for tone management. Tone management is the muscle tone. The muscle becomes flaccid in a paralytic arm. So you have to strengthen the tone, and then that is called as tone management. Then sensory re-education, balance retraining, fall prevention. If you see, 60% of patients who are hemiplegic will have a fall in the first 3 months, they say. Studies have said that. So fall prevention is another important strategy that we'll have to teach them. Gait re-education and functional mobility training. So if you see here, what we can do as nurses for physiotherapy is, we are not physiotherapists, but what we can do is reinforce the exercises that the physiotherapist is teaching. We know what are the exercises. So, but even if you don't remember the whole thing, these 6 exercises will really help the patient. That is fine motor exercises. You can just the thumb and the index, that is fine motor. This is really helpful. The index and the thumb will help you write, hold a spoon, hold a tumbler, etc. So exercises for fine motor skills. Then stretches, you have to stretch the leg, stretch the arm, strengthening exercises. How do you strengthen? You can give a ball of various weight, and you can ask them to strengthen the muscles. Then coordination, how you can do coordination between legs and hands. Balancing. Then you have to have weight bearing, how you can bear weight. So these are small, simple exercises that we can learn from the physiotherapist or see when the physiotherapist is doing and reinforce on in our patients. That will really help in physical therapy. These are other exercises like a person who is hemiplegic, say, if the leg is affected. Some exercises are you teach them how to bend down and pick up something, turn to the left side, turn to the right side, lift their hands. All these are some exercises that we can teach them, reinforce with along with the physiotherapist. The other picture tells you about, it's just a rubber band, a rubber band that you can use. And these are the exercises that we can teach. One is called the finger scissor. You hold the band or the ball between middle finger and the index finger and ask them to tighten it. Fingertip pinch is another. Then power grip. There are balls available, soft balls. You can use that to use power grip. Flat pinch, then finger spread. You put the band around and then you expand you separate the thing. That's called finger spread. Finger extension, then full grip. All these are some exercises that we can teach for these patients. Now, hemiparesis, sensory changes, altered level of consciousness, all these are at risk for joint and muscle contractures. And it is also called as disuse syndrome. If you don't use a limb for some time, it goes into contracture. For example, if the foot is always, if the foot has lost the tone, and the foot will go into the plantar flexion position, and that will cause a foot drop. So positioning is very, very important technique as for nurses, with proper body alignment. And we all know that we reposition every 2 hours we should use sufficient number of pillows or trochanter rolls. Always for a stroke patient, it is better to put them on side lying positions, or the Fowler's position, straight position, never on supine, because the chances of aspiration pneumonia is more. Debbie was saying about the subluxation and about the pain. Care of shoulders during position is very, very important. Sometimes we put our hand under the shoulders and we lift them down, lift them up, and we don't realize how much pain they have, especially if the patient is not able to verbalize that they have pain. They undergo real trauma. So we have to really take care of that. Otherwise, patient will have subluxation because of us. It can be an iatrogenic subluxation. You see that picture, how you have to support the shoulders or the hands, and how do you have to hold the hip of the person if you are going to transfer them to bed touch. Of course, as a nurse, our nurses are very thin, and as a single person we may not be able to do it, but we must always get the support of the next person, either a next nurse or a attendant or the family person. Whoever is there, we can get help from them and safely transfer the patient. How do you make them, how do you position these patients is also very important. There is a misconception saying you should not position them on the affected side. It is not so. You can actually position them on the affected side and on the unaffected side. So if they are going to be on the affected side, provide enough pillows, put them in a fully lateral position, make sure the hemiplegic leg or the hand is positioned. That is all you have to say. So place the affected hand and the leg safely supported. If you take care of that, it is not a problem at all. You can again position on unaffected side. And if the patient is going to be on a back for some time, if the patient says, I am tired of both sides, I want to lie on my back, then you have to adequately give pillows, support both hands on 2 pillows, and then keep them only for some time in that position and quickly turn them to a lateral position. Again, similarly, when you are making the patient sit up, the patient's back should be well supported against the chair's back. The center of the chair, he should not be sitting at the tip or edge of the chair. He should be sitting well back, and then the legs should be on the floor. Both legs should be on the floor, or you keep a stool or something and keep the legs supported. And both arms, affected and affected, should be supported and in symmetrical position. It should be kept. not one hand lying. Many times we see that position, you know, when you ambulate the hand, the hand that is affected will be hanging. That should not happen. That will cause a lot of problem. This is about position. Contractures, as I said, called as disuse syndrome, and daily stretching exercises are very, very important for the patient. You know, as I said, the patient can hold with the unaffected hand, she can hold the affected hand and can do the stretching exercises on their own. You just have to teach them and they will do it. Or the family member should be taught proper stretching techniques. We always see in our department that once you teach to the relative so vigorously, they want their patient to become all right, they will continuously keep doing, and we have to go and tell them, please stop it for some time. You know, it is like that. So we can teach them and they are really motivated to help their own patient. Now, resting hand splints are applied to prevent contractures. You can see for the hand, the orthosis, you know, you can order for it if you have a good department for it, and then you can, it is available in the market also. We can just have to order it. Many people, patients, they buy from Amazon kind of things like that. So you can use resting hand splints. You can also use AFO. This is ankle foot orthosis. Using this splint will prevent foot drop. Any patient who is bedridden, not only stroke, even head injury or any other where they have low limb weakness, this AFO splint is very good to prevent foot drop. And we must make sure that patients do the shoulder exercise. It's called external rotation. I think I have a picture here. Okay. So in this picture, you can see how exercises are being done. If they don't do this, when there is hemiplegia, they will develop frozen shoulder. So some exercises are needed as external rotation, internal rotation, diagonal abduction. The picture tells, and it's also written there. So you know how to do it. But we must make sure that it is not done very vigorously to damage the joint, but slowly and steadily we have to do every day. So the point here I want to reiterate is, when we start with physiotherapy for any patients, start steadily, do it, increase the intensity. First day, if we do for 5 minutes, the next 2 days we must do for 10 minutes. Then slowly keep increasing so the person becomes, you know, the repetitive motion, the repetitive gesture will help their memory and they will start doing on their own. So this is about physiotherapy, shoulder position. Communication. Communication, as I said, MCA stroke is one stroke where a patient can go into aphasia. Now, aphasia, dysphasia, dysarthria, all these are problems. Dysarthria is little different from aphasia. Aphasia is where there is inability to communicate. You have 3 types of aphasia. One is motor, sensory, or global aphasia. Now, sensory aphasia is also called as receptive aphasia or Wernicke's aphasia. Now, because Wernicke's area is the one which is responsible for the sensory talking, that is hearing and comprehending what one person is talking. Now, these patients who have sensory aphasia will not be able to understand any language. You go and talk to them, it will be like a foreign language. They'll blink at you. They'll be just blank. They don't understand anything. And if a group is talking, there are 3-4 people asking them questions, they won't know anything. They won't understand. And long complex sentences they will not understand. You cannot ask them 3-4 questions together. You ask them to read a text, they will not be able to read. Or you ask them to write their name, they will write the name, but then you ask them read what you have written, they will not be able to do. And if there's a background noise, too much of shouting and all, they will not be able to. So these are the problems with patients with sensory aphasia. Motor aphasia, on the other hand, is called as expressive or Broca's aphasia. Broca's area is in the frontal lobe and Wernicke's area is in the temporal lobe. Now, these patients will understand perfectly all right. You ask them, what did you eat today morning? They will say, they will not be able to say. They cannot form sentences. They can only utter one single words, you know, just one word only they will be able to say. And if they want to say milk, they will say water. If they want to say water, they will say milk. It is very difficult for them to find the right word. And whatever they say, you know, sometimes they say yes or no, but they really mean the opposite. if you ask them, what do you want to eat, they will say yes, but it's actually no. No, so their communication is very unreliable. They mean something and say something. So these are the problems with these patients. So we have to be very carefully deal with these patients. They are like children. Global aphasia is, when they have both motor and sensory aphasia. So we have to take care of them. But dysarthria is where, because of the muscle weakness of the face, they are not able to speak. That is, voice will be muffled, slurred, strained. It's very quiet, those kind of things. Now, what can we do? We have to be very, very sensitive to this particular problem, and we have to take them. We cannot mock at them, or we cannot ask them anything that will hurt them. That is very important as nurses when we do, because the short term memory, thinking process, everything is affected. So their communication is very slow. Sometimes it's very frightening for them and frustrating for them, because they're not able to understand, they're not able to speak. I've seen many stroke victims who are still, after 1 year also, they're not able to regain their speech. They understand, but they are not able to speak well. There was a person, an elderly person, about 50 years. He had a stroke, and then he lost his complete language. He was not able to talk, but later he regained the vernacular language. He was able to talk in vernacular, but he forgot English. But he was a well-educated person. He forgot English. So you ask anything in English, he will not be able to understand. Slowly, he understood English also, one by one word he understood, and now he is actually talking. So each person differs. So we have to know our strategy should be tailored according to the person. We have to spend time with them. Unhurried approach should help. Strong motivation from the healthcare worker is needed. We have to stimulate conversation, ask open-ended questions, encourage them to talk more. Practicing communication skills will definitely help in their recovery. Of course, as I said, the rate and level of recovery is different for everyone. So you cannot expect what is happening in one patient to happen in next patient. Also, we must remember that it depends on the severity of the damage that stroke has caused. It takes time. That's about communication. But this is a picture. Patients who cannot communicate, you can have a communication board or picture board like this, and you can tell them, you can say, show them that if they want hot drink or cold drink, they can point out and say, I want this, I want that, I feel cold, I want to go to the restroom, things like that. So this will really help. We have it in our department, and sometimes it's very, very helpful to communicate with patients. Coming on to dysphagia, that is again common after stroke, affecting about 42% to 67% within 3 days of stroke. And half these patients aspirate and develop pneumonia. And not only that, dysphagia can also lead to malnutrition, because they're not eating, dehydration, weight loss, and they feel very upset because they cannot eat. Aspiration may be silent or occult, and sometimes not clinically obvious. So we must be very careful to do the swallowing screen as quickly as possible, and identify if there is a problem and deal with it. Usually it is the speech language therapist who does the screen, but now the strategy is a stroke nurse with adequate training can also do a swallowing screen. The assessment tools there are many tools. One is Macy's bedside swallow screen. There is one BJ tool. There are many tools. If you go onto the net, you will see many tools. We can use any one of the tools to assess the swallowing. It's very important that we do that. We can, as nurses, teach them some exercises for swallowing. One is effortful swallow. That is, you, as if something is there in the mouth, you ask the person to use all the effort and try to swallow, the saliva or what. Just mimic as though you're swallowing. That will improve the swallowing. The next one is hawk exercise, which when you say hawk, ask the patient to say hawk. This is a English tool, so we have to say, we have to find out an Indian tool now. We don't have. So hawk is, when you say that, you have that movement of the bolus going down. So that is another thing. And Masako maneuver is also thing. You bring the tip of the tongue through the teeth and try to swallow. So these are some exercises that we can teach our patients when we know that swallowing is difficult. Coming to cognitive rehabilitation, inability to concentrate is the common finding that you have as a cognitive problem. You give them a task, half plate you give, you will very little rice if you give also, they will eat 2-3 spoonfuls and then they will not concentrate on that. You ask them to write one line, they will write one word they will write and then they will forget what they are writing. So focusing is a problem in them. How can you assess the cognitive is mini cog test we use. There are many other tools, but we prefer mini cog because it's simple to use. Mini cog test is a 3-word recall. 3-word recall is you tell the patient 3 words, any unrelated words you tell them, and then after a few seconds you ask them to repeat. If they are able to repeat all the 3 words, you give them 3 marks. If it is 1 or 2 or 0, then accordingly you will give marks. And then also there is a clock drawing test. You ask them to, you draw a clock and then you mark the timings and you tell them mark 9 o'clock in the clock. Okay, or they can themselves draw. That also is possible. So depending on that, you know, if it's an abnormal clock drawing test, you suspect dementia or memory loss. And if there's a normal clock drawing test, it is no suspected dementia. So this is a mini cog test. So cognitive rehabilitation provides therapeutic activities related to attention. We can ask patients to play some games that will also increase their attention. Chess, or if they are good in painting, they can start singing, because singing, they say it's a very good technique to remember, bring out the cognition, especially the lyrics. If they remember, if they can start singing, they will remember, and that will help them. Words such as brain training games are also there for cognitive rehabilitation. Memory rehabilitation, the 3 important structures, there are many more, but 3 more very important structures in brain is hippocampus, amygdala, and frontal lobe. Hippocampus is for learning and spatial memory, learning new things. Amygdala is for emotional significance to memories, and frontal lobe is for short-term memory. So if you, try and stimulate the brain, it will help them. Like you can show the pictures of the family members and ask, who is this? Tell me what is the name of this person. Do you remember this? Do you remember this event? Those kind of things will stimulate their memory. And we can also give them an exercise. Sometimes people will ask, he's a very learned person, and you're having this exercise. You write A and you ask them to write all the words that they remember that starts with A. So that way you can stimulate their memory, and it will improve. In the first 3 months or 6 months, definitely memory will improve. But it needs stimulation. Okay, that is about the rehabilitation. I have not actually should confess that I have not touched every part because the time is very short. We will definitely. Okay, we will finish the rest. I mean, like, we have 2 more days, we can do that. Now, going on to the prevention of stroke, primary prevention, these are the aspects that we have to concentrate. High blood pressure, heart disease, diabetes mellitus, hyperlipidemia, alcohol consumption, smoking, oral contraceptives, obesity. Now, whatever is there, we may not have everything, but whatever is there, we must make sure that we take care of ourselves to prevent stroke. And the evidence is, there is a study done by Banerjee and Mark in 2017 on stroke prevalence, and they found hypertension is the biggest risk factor among Asians and Hispanics, and out of which MCS had been very common, leading to aphasia. Now, there's another study, WASIT trial, which also tells anybody who has a systolic more than 140 and a high cholesterol, there is an increased risk of recurrent stroke. So we must make sure that we take care of this is called a stroke risk scorecard. A simple thing to use, anybody can use it. You have the risk factors listed out there, and you have high risk, caution, and low risk. The red is high risk, yellow is caution, green is low risk. Now, if you have more than three in the high risk column, you definitely have to make sure that you go to the doctor and you take care of yourself. If the caution, if you have more in caution, that is about 4 to 6, you're okay, but still you have to bring it to borderline. If you have more in low risk, you have a very low risk for stroke, and you are safe. This is what the stroke risk card says, and it will be useful for anybody, not only a medical person, anybody, a lay person can also use this thing. This is called the CHADS-VAS score. Everything is given 1 point and 2 points. Age more than 75, the diabetes mellitus, prior stroke, vascular disease, hypertension, congestive heart failure. So, you know, that category, this will tell you what is the stroke risk. This is being used in India also. So the recommendations for primary prevention is healthy adults, all of us should perform moderate to intense aerobic exercises. Definitely a half an hour walk is needed for everyone, and that is class 1 level of evidence is B. Reduced intake of sodium and high intake of potassium is recommended. 2 to 3 grams only is recommended per day. That comes up to 1 teaspoonful. That is all we must take per day, including breakfast, lunch, dinner, everything. There's something called DASH style diet, where inclusive of fruits, vegetables, reduced saturated fat. This is again, more of this will help in preventing stroke. That is class 1 level of evidence A. Stress reduction strategies, meditation, all that, the spiritual strategies that we do, cessation of alcohol, smoking, simple medical follow-up will also help in primary. In secondary prevention of stroke, this includes strategies to reduce the risk of recurrence among patients who had previously presented with stroke or TIA. A person had been having stroke, we must identify what is the risk factor in this particular patient and then control that or address that particular issue. Use of antithrombotic or anticoagulant drugs are very helpful. Sometimes statins will be used, sometimes antihypertensives will be used, OHs will be used to prevent secondary prevention of stroke. There are also some studies, some surgeries being done, some endovascular treatments are being done like CEA and all that. That is also inclusive in the secondary prevention. Tertiary prevention is aimed at prevention of a second or a third stroke and minimalization of disability. Now, we have to have perfect rehabilitation strategies to prevent as much as possible the disability should be reduced, and we have to improve the quality of life. That is tertiary prevention of stroke. Now, I want to just give you some evidence. You can go and read all these things. SPRINT trial is a trial which is called as systolic blood pressure intervention, where they aim at BP target less than 120. Then ATTEND trial is a family-led rehabilitation program which is happening in India and elsewhere in other countries also. And in India, it is a ICMR project. It is being done among 27 hospitals. They focus on physiotherapy. FAST-MAG trial is giving magnesium sulfate in the acute phase of stroke. They think magnesium sulfate is a neuroprotector, so it will prevent disabilities. BETA-TOPS trial is giving vitamins to prevent stroke. That is another trial that is going on. And in India, we have the Indian Stroke Association has introduced many videos, booklets on community health program regarding stroke. And there is a CBAC checklist also, which Indian Stroke Association has given to prevent NCDs. So you can, there's no time for me to explain everything, so please have a look at it. And I've given one link here, and that talks about the ASA journals. They talk everything about all what I said. Practically everything is given there, so please go have a look at it, and it will definitely help you in wherever you are. World Stroke Day is celebrated on the 29th of October every year. Unfortunately, last year we could not do it. I would like to conclude saying stroke is preventable and treatable, and early recognition of stroke saves brain time. Prompt treatment is the key to prevent disability. Thrombolysis is possible within up to 4.5 hours. Mechanical thrombectomy is possible within 6 hours. And stroke rehabilitation is magical because of new theory of neuroplasticity. But always we must remember prevention is better than cure, and prevent stroke so that we will be able to, the community will be saved. There's a SAN clock which tells, every minute we waste after a stroke, we are losing brain cells. So we must spot stroke and stop stroke. Thank you very much for your patient listening.